is a McLaren 675LT, and it's one of the most impressive modern McLaren creations. It's also one of the rarest, as McLaren says they built just 500 units of the 675LT coupe like this one, plus another 500 Spider models with a convertible top. And today, I'm going to review the 675LT. Before I get started, be sure to check out Cars and Bids, which is my new online enthusiast car auction website for modern enthusiast cars. If you're looking to sell a cool car from the 1980s and up, Cars and Bids is the place to do it. You will get the most interest and the most money for your cool car. If you're looking to buy a cool car from the modern era, Cars and Bids has an amazing selection with daily live auctions of very cool cars. Check it out at carsandbids.com. I've borrowed this 675LT from McLaren Newport Beach, which is the McLaren dealership here in Newport Beach in Southern California. McLaren Newport Beach has a lot of cool cars, many new McLarens. They have an excellent facility, and they have this rare 675LT, which is for sale. You can check out this 675LT and McLaren Newport Beach by clicking the link in the description below. So let's talk 675LT. This is basically the performance version of the McLaren 650S. It came out for the 2017 model year, a year after the 650S went on sale, and it's like a 650S in every way, but a little bit more. It has better brakes, for example, and it's lighter. It weighs about 220 pounds less than a 650S. And it has better aerodynamics. As suggested by its name, 675LT stands for long tail, which is a reference to the larger spoiler in the back. And it doesn't stop there. The 675LT also has 25 more horsepower than the 650S for a total of 666 horsepower. And it has a slightly quicker transmission. So it'll do 0 to 60 in 2.9 seconds, which is 1/10 faster than the 650S. Basically, the 650S is a very impressive exotic sports car. The 675LT is a slightly more very impressive exotic sports car, and that includes the price. This 675LT is currently offered at a steep $300,000. And today, I'm going to review it. First, I'm going to take you on a tour of the 675LT, and I'm going to show you all of its interesting quirks and features. Then, I'm going to get it out on the road and drive it, and then I'll give it a Doug score. All right, I'm going to start the quirks and features of the 675LT with the key, which is pretty cool. This is a McLaren key. You have lock on the top, then unlock, and then the trunk opener button on this little pad on one side. Flip it over, and it's carbon fiber with the McLaren logo on the other side. Very much cooler than the key for your car. Before I climb inside though, I want to talk about one other especially exciting feature in this car, and that would be the roof scoop. This car has a roof scoop designed to channel even more air into the engine than a regular 675LT. This is incredibly rare. I've heard only about a dozen, maybe 20 675LTs were made with this option. That's because it cost over $40,000. But just look at it, a roof scoop like the P1 and the McLaren F1. That is one of the coolest features in the car biz. It really looks like a race car, and I love it. 40 grand is steep, but maybe it's worth it. But anyway, next, time to climb inside the 675LT, and to get in, you can see there's no immediately obvious door handle. You have to look under this little ridge on the body, and there's this little rubber pad. You press that little rubber pad, and then the door opens up, and of course, it opens upwards like a supercar door should, and reveals the interior of the 675LT. But before we climb in the 675LT, a few quirks worth noting in this area. One, these little buttons on the inside of the door. One of them has a car being towed. That's putting it in tow mode, so the alarm won't go off. The other one is a trunk opener button. Now, this is a brilliant location for a trunk button. Say you have the door open, you don't have access to the trunk button on the key, you want to put something in the trunk. Well, this way, you don't have to reach inside the car, down in some footwell, and open up the trunk that way. You have a button right here. You can just stand up, press it, open up the trunk. It is very good attention to detail, surprising for an exotic supercar. But anyway, moving inside, I want to talk about the door jamb area. One thing I love in here, these doors are electronic, and so if the battery dies, there has to be a backup manual way to get out. McLaren does that with this little strap, which has a warning label and like caution signs, and it looks like an ejector seat almost, but this is just the manual door release, and if your electronic release breaks or the battery's dead, you pull on that and it will open the door mechanically so you can still climb out. The other cool thing in this door jamb area, you can see in the front there's a badge that reminds you this is a 1 of 500 675LT. So just in case you needed to feel a little bit more special, you can just look at your door jamb badge. Anyway, once you climb inside, the thing you'll really notice right away is that the seats are tremendously tight. This car has the same sport bucket seats from the McLaren P1, McLaren's top-of-the-line flagship supercar, and they are tight. But they're designed to really hug you in place on a racetrack and keep you from sliding around, and they certainly do that. They also keep you from being comfortable, really, but they're good at what they do. But anyway, next we climb into the 675LT, and the interior in this car is largely the same as the McLaren 650S, which it's based on, but there is still a lot to talk about, in part because it's been years since I reviewed a 650S, so we'll go over everything. Now, one thing in here that isn't similar to the 650S is on the ceiling, and that would be the roof scoop architecture. You can see these carbon fiber panels. This is where the air comes in the roof scoop, and then it diverts down these channels behind the seats. And that is just cool. It looks so special because it is. And how could you go on living knowing that you could have had one of these with a roof scoop, but you don't? Fortunately, this car does. Next up, another interesting item in McLaren interiors, you have these dials in the center that are marked NST, and you have 2 of them. These are the drive mode dials. NST stands for normal, sport, and track. And you have 2 dials because the one on the left is marked H for handling, the one on the right is marked P for powertrain, and you can adjust those 2 items separately. Now, the interesting thing is you can't just turn the dials to go from normal to sport to track. You have to first press the active button so the car knows the dials should be active as kind of like a confirmation that you plan to switch drive modes. Then you can actually adjust the dials and go between the drive modes. It's like a 2-step process to make sure you really want to do it. Interestingly, that active button also applies to the 2 buttons below it, aero and launch. Launch is obviously launch control. You can't go into launch control mode without first pressing active. Aero will adjust the giant rear spoiler, the long tail of the 675LT, but again, you have to press active first or else it doesn't do anything. Now, unfortunately, I can't show you the spoiler going up or down because you have to be moving in order for it to change positions, but it does change positions. And when you get on the brake really hard, it positions itself straight up to create drag to help you slow down in addition to the brakes on the car. That's pretty cool.
By the way, check this out. When you press active, watch the gauge cluster. These little lights light up in a bunch of colors to confirm that your drive mode selection is now officially active. These are normally your shift lights that let you know when it's time to upshift, but they're also used here when you activate your drive mode dials. It's a cool look.
Next up, moving down from those center dials, you have the parking brake, which is unusually large in this car, right in the middle and frankly a focal point of the interior. It's kind of strange to see it so big. In fact, it's larger than the gear selector, which is also in this vicinity. You have D, N, and R for drive, neutral, and reverse. And if you're wondering how to put it in park, you stick it in neutral, you put on the parking brake, and then you turn the car off, and then it's in park. There's no actual park gear in a 675LT. And next up, another interesting item worth noting is the climate climate control vents in this car. There's only 3. You got one on the driver's side, one on the passenger side, and just one in the center, which must be shared between the passengers. Now, obviously, this would create a problem in most vehicles, but in the 675LT, the interior is so small that it probably cools down or heats up pretty quickly, and I suspect that center vent is never really fought over that much. And next up, we move on to the infotainment system, which is, of course, mounted right here in the center. It's a vertical screen, which I like. We're already used to vertical screens in our smartphones, and it just integrates so well into a lot of car interiors. The drawback here is it's not really all that great. For one thing, it only has the basics, nothing crazy or interesting or special in here, but more importantly, it's just slow to respond. You can see trying to move the navigation map around is frankly a bit of a chore. It just doesn't really go all that fast. Same deal if you try to move the radio station. You can see it has this cool slider, but it's not really that responsive. Now, modern McLaren models are more responsive than this. This car is 3-4 years old, but still worth noting that it isn't really the best infotainment system in the business, but it's pretty much par for the course for an exotic sports car, and maybe even a little better than some of its 2017 rivals. Now, one drawback of the infotainment system is that it includes the climate controls, meaning that if you want to adjust anything with the climate controls, you press this little fan button, then they pop up on the screen, and you have to use the screen to change the temperature, the fan speed, basically everything, which isn't really ideal, but that's how they do it. Of course, as you can see, the cool thing with the climate controls is when you adjust where you want the air to come out, you do so on a driver with a helmet. This is a high-performance, track-focused sports car after all.
One item worth noting in this infotainment system, this car features a track telemetry system, and if you tap on it, it sends you into a very track-focused menu in the screen where you can do all sorts of things at a track day, including record your laps with a camera mounted above the seats facing forward, an in-car camera from behind you so you can watch your laps later, your hand position, your reaction times. That's a cool feature for serious track-focused drivers.
And next up, speaking of screens, the gauge cluster area has 2 of them. There's one over on the left of the tachometer in the middle, and there's one over on the right. Now, these screens I covered in more detail in my McLaren 650S review, which I will link in the description below, so you can check this stuff out if you want. Here, I will say that the screen on the left is controlled by this little stalk coming out from the left of the steering wheel. You can use it to move up, down, kind of forward or backward in menus, and that's how you adjust what's on that screen. You can see all sorts of different car information, settings, that kind of thing. But the most important item controlled with that stalk to the left of the steering wheel is the lift system, the axle lifter in this car. You press up on that little stalk and it activates the lift system. Then you press up again and the car raises. Unfortunately, it raises glacially slowly. Take a look. And if you think that's slow, you should see it come down. It's even slower. Now, this is actually a problem because when you're driving one of these, you're cruising along, you have to pull into some driveway or business or whatever. You see it has a steep incline. You want to activate the lift and have it raise immediately, which a lot of other exotic cars do, like within 3 seconds. In this car, it takes 10, 12, 15 seconds. You're sitting there holding up traffic while the front of your car raises up so you don't damage the front lip. And the front lip in this car is this giant carbon fiber piece that's probably like $25,000 to replace. So you really have to get that front lip lifted up if you have any hope of not damaging that carbon piece. So you'll be holding up traffic anytime you're trying to go into a steep driveway in your 675LT. And next up, another interesting item worth noting in this interior is that there is pretty much no storage anywhere in here. There is no glove box. This area under the dashboard, that ain't a glove box, it doesn't open. There is no center console storage area. This piece here, just an armrest, it doesn't open. There is no door panel storage. Because the doors go up, no point in putting door panel storage there because your stuff will just fly out when you open the door. So there's really limited storage in here. Now, I will say, between the seats, you do get a net. So no glove box, no center console storage, no door panel storage, but there's a net. So you should be at least a little happy. You also have tiny little storage pockets mounted in the front of the seats where you could put another really small item, registration paperwork, whatever. Interestingly, you do have cup holders mounted below the dashboard in the center screen. There are 2 relatively large size cup holders in here. So there's no storage aside from some tiny little paper holding nets but there is 2 cup holders. You can't put anything in this car except for drinks. But despite the interior situation in here, this car does have more storage than you might think. I'm going to show you the front trunk, but first I want to talk about how you get out. I've already shown you the emergency door release strap that you can pull, but the door handle is cool too. It's this little piece, of course, mounted on the door, showing a McLaren with the door up. You pull on it and then the door electronically releases, and then you can do the work the rest of the way. But anyway, next we move on to the trunk of the 675LT up front, and you can see it is unusually large. I say unusually because typically in these high performance versions of high performance cars, the trunk is very compromised and very small, but not in this case. You could get a lot of stuff in here, certainly enough for a weekend trip or even a fairly good sized piece of luggage. Now, 2 interesting items worth noting in the trunk. One, there's a little outlet in here, although I'm told this is not an outlet you can use to like charge a toaster if you're tailgating with your 675LT. Instead, you can use that to plug the car in. So if you're going to let it sit for a while, you can plug it in there and the battery will stay charged, like a battery tender. The other interesting item in here is the emergency trunk release to get out. This is mandated by the US government that in case you kidnap someone, they can get out of your trunk with a release inside. Typically, it's like a glow-in-the-dark latch, but in this car, it's this little green button which is lighted. So if someone ever kidnaps you in a 675LT, just press that, the trunk will open and you can climb out. And now you know for that very, very likely possibility. Next up, one other item worth noting up front is the lighting situation, and specifically just how much it looks like the McLaren logo. Okay, take a look at this. This is the McLaren logo. You can see a distinctive look with this kind of arch shape. Now go over to the front light on the driver's side and you can see there's a lot of those McLaren logos in the front headlight. The turn signal, the running light, it all looks like McLaren logos. Now on the passenger side, obviously it's switched. It's the opposite way. Doesn't look like it as much, but it's a cool little Easter egg. McLaren logo goes hidden in the driver's side of the headlight. And next up we move around to the back where you can see the engine. Although this is as much as you can see the engine through this window because this panel is fixed in place. You can't open it. There's no latch or lever you can pull and then it pops open. Instead, you got to bring it to the McLaren dealership and then they can open it up with tools. It is not something that is meant for you to open up and then fool around with. They feel like you'll break something, and frankly, they're probably right. But it would be cooler to get a little bit closer to the engine than this, but for now, this is all we got. Now, like I mentioned, this engine's 666 horsepower, twin turbo V8, and it sends this car from 0 to 60 in 2.9 seconds. Tremendously impressive numbers. But to me, maybe even more impressive back here is the exhaust. I love where it comes out, right in the middle, taking precedence over everything else in the back. And of course, I love how it sounds. Take a listen to the 675LT's exhaust note. And next up, let's address the 675LT's LT for long tail. To do that, we have to talk spoiler. This is a larger rear wing than what you get in a McLaren 650S. That's why they call it the long tail. And it has some other kind of extensions back here, like the rear diffuser is a little bit more aggressive, and it has a longer tail. Now, it doesn't quite have a long tail in the traditional sense like the McLaren F1 long tail, which really looked like a completely different vehicle, but you get the idea and you get where they're coming from, and it's a historical McLaren name. There are some other upgrades to the 675LT on the outside and the front. The side skirt's a little bit different than the 650S, but mostly this car just looks like a 650S with a few modifications. And on the outside, frankly, that's pretty much what it is. Certainly the coolest bit on the outside is the roof scoop. And so those are the quirks and features of the McLaren 675LT. Now it's time to get it out on the road and see how it drives. All right, driving the 675LT. This is obviously a very special car, and you notice right when you get in that it's pretty insane. You're sitting in these seats that are incredibly tight, and as crazy as the 650S is, you can just tell instantly that this is a more radical, expressive, crazy car than that. Yeah, right away, just going over even a few bumps, I mean, you can tell it is really, really a rough ride. But that's kind of the point of this. McLaren figured, you know, you might as well stick a rough ride in this car. Anybody who was bypassing the 650S to get to this car knew what they were getting into. They knew it was going to be crazy. They knew that they wanted that. Of course, power is just fantastic. The transmission responds very, very quickly, which is a hallmark of McLaren's. They use a fantastic transmission. It is unbelievably responsive and fast. The car isn't actually as uncivilized kind of at lower speeds as you might expect, given that it's sort of like the GT3 RS version of a McLaren. It is rough riding, there's no question about that. But it's not too jerky, it's not like it's rumbly or anything in here, and if you can get into these seats, it's reasonably comfortable. And the transmission is relatively smooth, even if you have it in sport mode. And the sounds are great. All McLarens make great sounds, but in this car it just feels dialed up a little bit more, and it really has a great noise to it. And the sound of the roof scoop, you can really hear it. You know, McLaren offers this on some of their vehicles and people don't get it. It's very expensive. I'm just blown away though. If it was up to me, I wouldn't get one without it. It's just one of the coolest features. And you know, the F1 has it, the P1 has it, it's part of the McLaren heritage, and you can hear it and it's cool. Yeah, I'm surprised at how well it handles traffic. You know, I sit in a lot of exotic cars, especially the really kind of focused ones where you really don't want to be in traffic with them. The transmission is jerky and that sort of thing. This car doesn't really feel like that to the same extent. The only real drawback is that the ride is rough, and so you're going to be dealing with that. But otherwise, I mean, it's a fairly drivable GT3 RS type car, ultimate track vehicle. All right, I'm going to push it. Here we go. Wow. Wow. This car is so fast. And the really incredible thing about it is it's just so immediate that and you're so low and you're feeling the road. That becomes a benefit when you're going at that speed. It is really impressive. That was really something. And the transmission just fires off shifts, I mean, instantly. It is so quick, and everything feels just incredibly right now happening. Man, it is rough though, and it is low. That lowness and that stiff suspension really contribute to your sensation of speed though in quite an impressive way. Obviously the steering is just fantastic. The car is incredibly precise. The steering is tremendously quick. It's been a while since I've driven the 650S. I don't remember really the comparison between the two quite all that well, but compared to the 720S, it certainly feels as good or maybe even better. It's really quite an impressive experience when you start to turn the wheel. The car just goes exactly where you want, and immediately. That's what it's all about. Man, the sound that the roof scoop makes is just unreal. You can just hear like wind happening above your head. I truly can't believe there are people in this world who wouldn't get that. Even as expensive as it must be. This is a very expensive car. Get the cool stuff. And this thing really delivers quite a thrill. It's a lot more expensive than a 650S, but it's much rarer and it's just better on the little details. And so especially if you're into track driving, it's the one you want more than any other one. And so that's the McLaren 675LT. Think of this as the GT3 RS version of the McLaren 650S. It's faster, it's lighter, it's better in every way, except, well, comfort and, of course, price. But this is so expensive in part because it's so amazing and in part because it's so rare. Get one of these and you can laugh at McLaren 650S owners and their common vehicle when you see them at a stoplight. Anyway, now it's time to give the 675LT a Doug score.
Starting with the weekend categories and styling, the 675LT is handsome, but a bit too similar to the 650S and maybe a bit generic, and it gets a 7 out of 10. Acceleration does 0 to 60 in under 3 seconds, and it gets a 10 out of 10. Handling is tremendously sharp and precise, and it gets a 10 out of 10. Fun factor is huge, especially with that roof scoop, and it gets a 9 out of 10. Cool factor is just a little lower, as it doesn't quite rise to the cool status of the ultimate McLarens like the P1 or the Senna, and it gets an 8 out of 10 for a total weekend score of 44 out of 50. Next up are the daily categories and features. The 675LT is about normal for a car like this, and it gets a 6 out of 10. Comfort is low, the ride is harsh, and the seats are tight, and it only gets a 3 out of 10. Quality is good, the interior is nice, but McLaren reliability is a bit questionable, and it gets a 6 out of 10. Practicality is normal for a car like this, and it gets a 2 out of 10. Finally, value. This car is very expensive, but it's also very rare. It's unusual you can get an ultra-limited car like this for only this much money. It gets a 7 out of 10 for a total daily score of 24 out of 50. Added up, and the Doug score is 68 out of 100, which places the 675LT here against other modern supercars and McLarens. It's low on this list, but it's also a bit older than most of these rivals. The 720S is a closer competitor. Still, the 675LT holds its own, especially in weekend categories where it beats out the new 911 Turbo and ties the Lamborghini Huracan. The 675LT is really an amazing car if you don't mind a rough ride and a big sticker price. It's special, it's rare, and it's really impressive to drive.